All right, again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's post-impact webinar, Revenues and Relationships, Managing Vendors and Supplier Relationships. My name is Brian Munson. I am the Business Development and Sales Manager for NCBA CLUSA, as I just mentioned. And I will be today's webinar moderator. And we're joined today by Corcentric, an associate member of NCBA CLUSA. He'll be your co-host today. Prepare for Impacts is our exclusive webinar series that is meant to explore key challenges central to the business operations of purchasing co-ops. In the lead up to our Impact Conference, which took place October 4th through the 6th, we used these webinars as preparation for our workshop discussions. But with the conference now complete, our pivot in how we use these webinars is actually to build upon the discussions that we had. And today's webinar is incidentally our final one for 2017. So very excited to put a bow on this thing today. In our Revenues and Relationships Masterclass, we convened a workshop table that focused on managing the vendor and supplier relationship. As you know on the line, many times deals can get made or broken based on the strength of the co-op's relationship and the co-op member's relationship with their business contacts. So, as we see the rebate model, fluctuate, we can say that an open and stable relationship can actually really help your co-op members endure through those tough times, but also allow for an investment in maybe new ideas and new programs in some of the best times. So our presenter today is Sean Bliss from Corcentric, and he brings with him to this conversation 15 years of experience in procurement. So it'll be exciting to hear from him. Before we begin, just a quick bit of housekeeping for everyone. Participant phone lines will be muted during this presentation to reduce background noise. There will be a chance to, of course, pose questions, just not verbally. You can do so at any time during the presentation by typing the question into your GoToWebinar control panel. It's on your screen there, should be on the right-hand side. I will collect those questions at the end of all this, and we'll have some time for Sean to answer those. Lastly, we are recording this program. It will be archived on our website, and you will receive an email containing the link to that posted recording tomorrow, actually. So feel free to share it with colleagues, peers, friends, family, anyone that's interested in this topic and can use the information. So with that being said, today's panelist is Sean Bliss, the Vice President of Sales for Indirect Spend at Corcentric. He's a great guy. He was actually here in the office yesterday, working on some fun things with NCBA. So, Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we can get started.
Okay, great, Brian. Thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction. Like Brian said, I'm the Vice President of Sales for Corcentric for our Indirect Spend programs. I've spent a majority of my career in the supply chain area, specifically within strategic sourcing and procurement. And what we are going to cover here today is an overview of maybe some tips and tricks of what you can do in managing your supply base when it comes to supplier consolidation, market testing, as well as contracting and management. So, who is this for? Overall, really, it's not just for procurement professionals. Everyone in the organization has a hand, has a stake in making sure that company assets are used properly, company funds are spent properly. So it's important for everyone within the organization, if you have any kind of if you're doing any kind of buying or purchasing, if you're signing any contracts with suppliers, that you really have a good handle on the approach and have some tricks up your sleeves, when it comes to working with your suppliers and optimizing, what you're looking to do. So we talk about, the title of this webinar, Managing Vendors and Supplier Relationships. So we talk about what's the difference between a vendor and a supplier. A lot of times those terms are used interchangeably. So the way I've always defined it, a vendor is someone that's kind of selling a one-off. Someone a lot of times more so, business to consumer versus business to business. Where a supplier is somebody that's going to provide a service, that's going to provide a solution to you, ongoing. One of my managers one time said, well, vendors sell you hot dogs, suppliers, sell you value. So when I refer to my partners and the people that I have utilized in my career as a procurement professional, or when we work in a consultative role, with our members in our Corcentric group, I typically utilize that supplier role, and actually the suppliers that we utilize prefer that I refer to them as suppliers because they see themselves as partners in an overall effort of what we're trying to accomplish, together as a group. So there are two important steps, that you must take to ensure, that you're getting optimal performance from your suppliers. Ensure that pricing is consistently market tested and align service levels to meet the demands of the organization. However, complacency with your suppliers can really lead you off that performance path. The complexity of managing and controlling spend can lead to an attitude that if it's not broke, don't fix it. However, if you don't have a clear picture of what you're spending, and if you're just maintaining an as-is purchasing process, you're going to ensure that things stay broken in the long term. But there's three very important things you can do to gain control over these process and drive down overall costs. And I put these in really three buckets. One being supplier consolidation. Using as few suppliers as possible in a concentrated way will get you higher service levels, better pricing, and overall better attention, from that supplier. Constantly testing your suppliers to the market. We all get in a place where we've got somebody, we've worked with them for years. They're telling you their pricing's great. They're telling you, hey, we're giving you this great deal, this great discount level, these great rebate. But at the end of the day, you don't really know unless you test it. So the part of any process, and again, this doesn't have to be a huge blown out procurement process with however many steps over multiple years. You really should just look at, those suppliers that are key to your business and test them on a regular basis. Make sure, that they're really doing what they say they're supposed to be doing. And then, from that standpoint, making sure that the prices that you're paying are really tied to ever-changing market conditions. And third, contracting and supplier management. Contracting isn't just something you do at the end of the process. It's not something, we've already gone through the negotiation and okay, let's look at the contract and redline and hand it back. You really need to take a look from before you even engage the supplier in a contracting process, what you want to do, what you want to get out of that contract, and how do you get out of that contract? Should your business change or should you have an issue where you don't need that supplier or you want to change the commitments of that supplier. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks here, some things to think about, before you even start the contracting process as well. So let's just jump in on the spend side. So tail spend is a really exciting procurement term and refers to the number of suppliers that you have outside of the 80% of your spend. So to put it kind of simply, when you're doing a lot of one-off purchasing, sometimes this is on a credit card, since it's a one-off, you really can't impact that spend, because it's already happened. And you really don't, unless you've got a good system, a lot of times don't have good visibility into what you're doing. So a lot of these transactions will add up over time. When you take a look at it overall and who you're doing business with, you take a year's worth of data, you'd be shocked at how many people you're actually doing business with on a daily basis. One real good way to look at it, and one kind of trick that I use is, do a run of AP data for 1 year. Let's look at everything you've spent for a year, and it can be at the top level. Like I bought this much from this person, and I spent X amount. Put those in a list, categorize them, put them in a bucket, and say, okay, this was office supplies, this was IT, this was shop equipment, or things that you go through every day. Classify it, take that classification, and then sort it. Okay, now you've got a list of, hey, here's all the stuff we spent on the office this year. If you sort that list by most spend to lowest, find out who the top 80% of your spend is with. And I guarantee you, it's probably going to be with about 1/4 of your total suppliers. So that's what we refer to as the tail, is that other 80% of your suppliers that are really only making up 20% of your spend. Well, you're spending a lot of money, whether you kind of realize it or not. Maintaining that tail, making sure that tail is, if it's administrative time, it's a PO cost or processing, credit card fees, as well as just overall management of that tail spend, can really add up over time. So one of the things that as you look at it, again, it doesn't have to be a sophisticated procurement process. This is something you can do with probably 20 minutes of spreadsheet and really look at, what you're spending. And I'll give you an example here on the next slide. But, as a rule, what we found, and the statistic that we found, for the average company, a 5% savings on sales spend can be the equivalent of a 10% increase in net profit. So by taking those dollars and that admin costs and all those costs that add up, you could, by just shrinking that, consolidating to buying through fewer suppliers, it really can add to your bottom line at the end of the day. So if you work with a company that has multiple locations, likely purchasing can be occurring, on an ad hoc basis, with employees choosing to deal with local suppliers rather than consolidating the purchasing to multiple locations. This example here is actually one of our clients that we were working with, and they said, okay, we've got this spend, with Grainger that we do. That's who we spend for our MRO. They're our preferred supplier. Everything goes through that. So I said, okay, well, just send me your data file. Let me look at it. Look at what you're spending in MRO. So this is what popped up, a little over $2 million in MRO. Well, yeah, they spent about $900, almost $1 million with Grainger that year. But if you look at the other ones, well, there's McMaster Cars in there. There's Motion. There's Fastenal. There's Lawson's in the tail. There's your tail. That outside of that 80%. So at the end of the day, they were like, wow, we're spending 80% of our spend is with 9 people. But we have 55 different suppliers that we're dealing with on a regular basis. So, our advice to them was like, okay, great. You've got a good relationship with the person you're spending the money with, and they're the ones that are giving you all the attention. But how much money are you spending in maintaining, the relationships with the other 55 people, in that group? So when you do that, it really makes it obvious, the importance of supplier consolidation and how that can really really add to the bottom line. So when you look at aligning your suppliers to market, which was the second bucket there, it's not just price negotiation. Pricing negotiation is really, kind of towards the middle to end of the process of what you should be looking at as you go across. Really understanding, your contract management. Are your suppliers doing what they said they were going to do? Is there somebody else there on the market that could do better and provide better services for less money? Selecting those suppliers, again, testing the market. Are there new players in the market? Are there new people that can do, that have come up? I mean, with businesses and the use of technology and that growth, are we relying on suppliers that we've had around for a while just because it's comfortable or just because you don't want to rock the ship? The ability to go out and test those suppliers is important. Having access to market data. I mean, there are a ton of free areas where you can go on websites that you can go to find information. One really good one that I use a lot is any kind of state RFPs. So RFPs for school systems or state-run businesses or local municipalities have to publish all of their RFPs. They have to publish the results, the pricing, and all the responses. It's public record. So if you do a simple search for, say you're looking at printers and you're trying to do, hey, are we paying too much if we've got, printers in our office? You can actually go out and search for RFPs that have been done, related to printers, and really get information and pricing. Just, you can be creative in going out and looking at, the pricing you're paying versus what somebody else is paying, from that standpoint. Payments are huge. When do you have to pay, and when, how long does it take? And from the supplier standpoint, obviously they want money as soon as you can. You want to float as much as you can to not have to pay the bill to hold on to that cash. So that's a very important piece of any negotiation, really understanding what your tolerance is, because a lot of times suppliers will pay you a savings if you pay faster than the typical 45, and maybe I've seen them as high as 90, 120-day requirements from some companies on payment. So there are actually opportunities, from that standpoint. Same with credit and how you're managing your credit. Sourcing, that's the action, and that's really the piece that helps you go out. Again, it doesn't have to be an overly complicated process, but one that when you're looking at, overall what you're trying to accomplish, having a plan of action from beginning to end, is important. And then really that should, as an output of all of those steps, that price negotiation, the pricing, piece of it, which everybody typically jumps to first, is really you've done your due diligence and you've got a strong output from there. So, like I said, it's all about the planning before you start. Most people, when you go in, okay, what are we going to do? Let's put out a bid, or let's put out an RFP, or let's put something out. it really needs to start in the planning session in order to execute what you want and define that. So, identifying those high spend areas, prioritizing them into waves, which is again is a procurement term, but really it's just your plan. Okay, we're going to go after office related equipment this year. Okay, in the second part of the year we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this. So everybody's overtaxed. You don't have enough people to do what you need to do. But so by prioritizing the actions, which ones are going to get the biggest bang for the buck? Which ones haven't we tested in a while? Based on some of this research, here's where we think we can really action and get some savings or get some better services. That's what a wave plan is, and that way you can kind of put that out there, and you've got a plan for the year. You've got an idea of what you're gonna save, and then within the organization, agreeing on the roles and responsibilities, getting your stakeholders involved, getting the people that are going to utilize the product, that are going to be impacted by these sourcing decisions that you make, getting them involved in the process, making them part of the RFP scoring team, getting them to evaluate, picking one over the other at the end of the day. It gets buy-in, it gets people interested in what you're trying to do. And that way, it's not like you went off on your own and made a decision and someone else has to live with, and then you've done all this good work and then they're not responsive at the end of the day to what you've done. So then once you have a plan, then it's the execution, with your supply base. So again, supplier selection is obvious, analyzing of the results, doing it in a very, apples to apples way, rationalizing all the soft pieces of a response. So it's not just pricing, it's service levels, it's company reputation, it's is this supplier going to be here in 6 months? Looking into their financials and understanding what they're going to do. And then, scoring that and getting people involved and making sure you're making the right decision. And then at the end of the day, it's important to manage and renegotiate from an agreement standpoint. So one of the areas that a lot of companies utilize is a GPO, which is a general purchasing organization. So a GPO can actually help augment your existing operation by kind of doing what we talked about in the pre-negotiating deals, having pricing and service levels pre-negotiated, because what they do is they go out into the world, they'll sign up multiple companies, and then use that consolidated spend power to negotiate with other companies, and sometimes can provide that combined purchasing power similar to the co-op, where you got many, you band as one, and then you go from a negotiation standpoint to your suppliers. So definitely recommend the use of a GPO, where it makes sense to save you time and help you expand into areas you couldn't before. So when we talk about, kind of the third piece of this, which is your contract negotiation and management. Contracts are confusing on purpose. Everybody's seeing, that the credit card contract, when you sign up for a new card or any kind of contract that you get from a supplier, even if you have a very good relationship with your supplier, it's important to really take the contract and really understand what you're getting into, beforehand. The one piece I would highly advise before you even start any kind of supplier selection or contracting process is start from the back and go from the front and go backwards. So start from termination back to when everybody's happy. Everybody's happy when you sign a contract on day one. Everybody's not happy, when either one or the other, needs to terminate it. So I put down a few questions to kind of ask yourself as you're going through that process. So, what do you owe them if you leave? So if you cancel a contract and you've got their equipment or their software or some asset that you've been using, what do you or cash, what have you committed to from a dollar standpoint? What do you owe them if you leave? What do they owe you? A lot of times you see this in software, intellectual property, data. If it's a cloud-based software system and they have your data, or they have your, they're holding something of yours, what do they owe you, if you leave, and how do you get that back, and how does that happen? At the end of the day, it's like, if they left you today, how would you deal with it? What if they cancel? What if they go out of business? What if they have to terminate for cause? There's a tornado, there's a hurricane. What if they left you today, what would you do? And if they won't leave, are you ready? If they're in there and you've got a contract that's, well, sorry, you signed a contract and, we're here and you're just going to have to keep paying us, are you prepared for it? So those are a few things as you go through your contracts to really think of in those levers as you go in. before you even start, because that will help you to define the requirements when you put out your request for proposals or your bids, but also to make sure the checklist as you're going through the final contract negotiations, to make sure that you've got that kind of language in there to support your needs should you look to terminate that agreement early. So typically contract terms can get confusing. Lawyers use a lot of acronyms, procurement people use a lot of acronyms. So here are really the top 5 typical contract terms and what they really mean and how you should look at them. Non-disclosure agreements. It's great if you can get it one way. Typically, just to make it fair and start the dialogue, having a mutual non-disclosure agreement. It's a standard agreement. I think you could probably go into a LegalZoom or even find a generic one online. Just so if you're sharing any data, you're sharing any intellectual property, you're sharing anything strategically with a supplier. It's just good, it's common practice just to make sure that you have something saying, hey, we're just going to keep this between us. Also, a good tip is to keep them perpetual, which means whatever you talk about, they can't disclose ever. A lot of suppliers will try to put a year, we'll do this for a year, a year or 2 term on it. I want it perpetual. That way, it's something, they're doing business with your competitors down the road. It just avoids any confusion or headaches, as you deal with your suppliers going forward. Your master services agreement, your MSA, this sets out the terms of the agreement, terms and conditions across everything you're going to do. So it is, all the rules, all the business rules, all the legal, all the, anything you need that would, doesn't matter what kind of agreement you have underneath that, or either a transaction agreement, you've got a master agreement that says, okay, here's how the 2 businesses are going to work together, this is how we get paid. Here's our insurance and indemnification language, and all of those kind of key points to a standard MSA should all reside in that overarching agreement, because that way, as you have subsequent agreements or changes, you're not rewriting everything. You're not rewriting all of the business rules and everything from scratch every time. You can just use future agreements in a more transactional way. So that gets you the statement of work. So this resides after your MSA. With actual dollars committed, either in an order form, purchase order, which you would send out, or a statement of work. Your statement of work, it should be a very simple document. It should really just describe a few key things. So it should describe the services, should define the period of time which the services should be delivered. So, there's a start, there's an end, and then the statement of work ends. Amount to be paid and how it's going to be paid. So if it's a set price, it's a time and material, and if it was a services agreement, but just really a definition of exactly, what the payment terms are. And then a acceptable criteria or measure of the work being properly completed. So did you do what you said you were going to do that we're paying you for? Is there a way that we can say, oh yes, check in the box, we've reviewed it, we agree, and then we can release payment to you. And then any continuing obligations, anything that's going to go on in perpetuity or for a certain amount of time past the end of that agreement, is key to have that documented so that everybody's on the same page. It avoids confusion and disruptions to your supply chain later on. An amendment versus an addenda. So an amendment changes something that exists within the agreement. An addenda adds something to an existing agreement. So a couple other tips and tricks when it comes to negotiating contracts. Word, if you're doing a kind of an initial back and forth in Word, and Word does a pretty good job of giving you the ability to track changes, which automatically creates a red line history of exactly what changed in the document. It does a strike through of the words that were deleted and adds the new ones in different colors, and then also keeps track of who did what where. So I'd highly recommend using that as a back and forth, but make sure that you lock and password protect the document. That way, the person that you're sending it to can't make changes and then accept them and save them in their own way. And then, it keeps you from saying, okay, now I know we have a record in this document, everything that's changed. And that way, at the very end, when everybody's in agreement, you as the contract owner can unlock it, accept all the changes, and just make sure that everything, is where it should be. Termination for convenience. I try in every agreement that I put in is to have a termination for convenience. Doesn't always work, and sometimes there's a time commitment, based on it. But business changes, priorities change. So getting into a 2 or 3 year agreement with someone, there should be some language in there to say, okay, you know what, we want to go a different direction, and here's where we want to go. What I don't recommend is a mutual termination for agreement, because basically you can negotiate a deal with a supplier, and if they say, okay, yeah, we've mutually the right to terminate within 30 days, that basically gives them a 30-day out if they don't like what's going on. If the sales aren't there, if there's something wrong with the agreement that from their side, they figure something out that they didn't know before, it gives them the ability to cancel. So then you could be left in the lurch, pretty quickly if somebody, one of your key suppliers just goes in and says, yeah, we're going to terminate, or they can use it as negotiating leverage, going forward as well. Never accept a take or pay agreement. So this kind of agreements say, okay, we'll allow you to cancel it, but then you got to pay us out. We see this a lot in the IT world, but I'm sure, from a services standpoint as well, where, you've got an agreement. So it's a 3-year agreement and you're going to pay us for 3 years. Well, if you get in a year in and say, oh yeah, you can cancel, but you still got to pay us out for the next 3 years, based on that. So that's one a lot of suppliers will try to slip in. So that's one, is a key negotiation point. That's one I would be very, very wary of. Also, auto renewals and auto price increases. So a lot of contracts will say, hey, this thing will auto renew unless notified within 30 days, prior to release, prior to renewal date. Typically, unless you've got a pretty good contract management system or something that's going to give you that warning, everybody gets busy and forgets about it. And then all of a sudden, oh, wow, we're within 30 days since you've auto-renewed for a whole another year on something that you either could have taken as a renegotiation or a service that you no longer need. So keep an eye out for anything in there that's auto-renewing or auto-price increasing. I always flip those around and say, no, you need it. It will terminate unless there is, specific written, direction to do so. And then closely review insurance and limitation of liability language. A lot of companies will try to change, indemnification responsibilities, insurance terms, things like that, where, could really pushes a lot more risk onto you. One good example of this was with a background check company. We were utilizing, for a previous employer, we're utilizing a separate company to do all of our background checks. And based on that information, we were either, making hiring decisions or interview decisions based on the, issues with records. Well, they came back for renewal and they had changed all of the limitation liability language and that. And we couldn't figure out why until we got in and had found out they had been hit with a class action suit by a bunch of people that had used that service had checked their background, and then therefore they were not eligible for employment. These people sued the background check company. So the background check company was trying to push the responsibility and that liability onto my, former company, for any kind of, go forward legal issues. So understand the industry, understand who you're dealing with, and really, if you see things out of the ordinary, dig in and make sure you understand why it's so custom and why is the language, for things that lead to exposure, for your organization. Anything having to do with consumer data, data privacy, anything like that, make sure that you have good representation or you have good templates as it relates to, who really owns the risk in those situations. So, building an effective contract management program, is core to the overall procurement performance. So again, it doesn't have to be a huge tool. You don't have to work with a third party to do this for you. It's really just using some common sense. Looking for contract compliance with your supply base, making sure that all parts of the organization have visibility into what you're signing up for, that you don't have people off doing separate contracts, that you may have some process in place for, at this dollar value, it has to be signed by this level of the organization and so forth, so that you don't have people in different departments that are signing you up as an organization and taking on risks that you may not even know about. Having that process across the board, leads to good integration and then harmonization with everything that you're reporting that up into your management, that you're legal, to make sure that you're covering the risks, you have visibility to what you've signed up for, and then it's tied closely into the suppliers that you're managing, and what they should be doing going forward. So again, a simple tool, as part of your supplier management process is to track and measure supplier performance in ways that are important to your business. This information that you capture, again, can be captured in a Word document. This could be captured, within a simple form and a simple Excel form. But identify some metrics that you want to measure that supplier to, and measure them. Are they doing what they said they're going to do? Are the prices correct? Are the service levels correct? If it's a service, are they performing with, are they answering the phones fast enough? Are they filling orders fast enough? Are they getting you supply when they say they're going to have it, to you, from a delivery standpoint? Pick a handful, pick 5 or 6 areas, and then come up with some key performance indicators within each of those to say, okay, here's how you're performing. And then, what I would do is even weight them. Which ones are more important than others? And you can create a pretty easy supplier scorecard. And then have those suppliers come in on a quarterly basis. Have them come in and sit down. I mean, they love coming in and take you to lunch or, take you to a game or something, but it's good to have them in and walk through, hey, here's what we're seeing. Here's what you said you were going to do, and here's where you're performing. Here's where you're not performing. Let's put some energy around where we're not performing, because that impacts your business. If you've got a supplier that you're dependent on and they're not performing, that can be very, very disruptive to cash flow and growth of your organization. So, by using this information to provide constructive feedback to your suppliers' performance, you remove hidden costs, you remove poor issues related to poor service delivery, and it really holds them accountable and forces them to really show up and on a regular basis and prove their value over the course of an agreement. This is especially important in multi-year agreements where you see the sales guys and you see everybody got all that attention until you sign it, and then you don't see them again until the renewal comes up. It's important to make sure you're engaging with those suppliers. And again, it doesn't have to be a tedious process. It can be very simple, but it's important to have that piece in your process to make sure that you're tracking and working with your suppliers, ongoing. So, overall effective management of your supply base leaves you with a handful of key things and key improvements. Obviously, we've been talking about smarter processes lead to lower costs. Fully managed supplier relationships. You bring them on as they're not just vendors selling you one-off stuff. They're suppliers. They're key partners in your business and what you're trying to do. Spend visibility. When you're working with your suppliers, have them run reports for you. Have them, if you can't track it internally effectively, have your suppliers provide some reports on pricing and sales. They should be tracking all that as well. So it's in compare notes and compare, where they may differ from you and whereas, and lean on them for efficiencies. They're in their business for a reason. Utilize your suppliers to really help you out, in doing things more efficiently. Straightforward payment relationships, understanding, contracting, and then managing who's doing what, who's paying whom, what are they supplying versus what you're getting, and making sure, suppliers, if they're getting paid on time and they're getting what they need, they will work with you very, very well. If you're not paying on time, then that's when they start shutting stuff down, and unless you're prepared for that, it can be very disruptive to the organization. Obviously, better prices, should be an offshoot of any overall supplier management, but also new control. So it's all about controlling your business, controlling what you want to do, and through that really having control and visibility over your supply base and all the risks and issues that go with it. But at least when you have that visibility, you can plan for the future, you can plan your growth, and then utilize that supply base effectively to help you get where you need to be. So with that, Brian, I'll kind of throw it back to you and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. That was awesome. And I think the timing is right on too. We're trying to keep these things as we move forward next year to right about that 30-minute mark. So thank you for hitting that pretty much on the nose. I asked this question to our presenter on Tuesday, Lisa Bordeaux. She was hosting a webinar about e-commerce, and you being at the Impact Conference, I'll ask you the same question. What was your sense of, and what were if you can maybe distill some of your conversations that you had during that workshop about, some of maybe the practical questions that people were asking on site. Because you guys had about 30 minutes to talk through some of this stuff. And so it was, we didn't get to do the deep dive that obviously you were able to provide today, but what were some people talking about at your table? And maybe that'll provide some context and some inspiration for some other questions to come through.
Sure. I think a couple of key ones. One was it shows up everywhere. It's resource constraint. It's time. Everybody's busy, especially if you've got a small business, and you're wearing several hats where you don't have a procurement person identified or someone that's their sole focus of their job. And so you're trying to make decisions as you go, that keep the doors open, keep the wheels moving. And a lot of this process is, seems tedious, or seems, I'd love to do it, but I don't have time. I'd love to look at this, but I don't have time. So I think one of that being a key message of, it doesn't take that much time to kind of do it right the first time. It just takes some discipline, a little process, a little planning up front, and it will save you an immense amount of time on the back end. Because when things are disrupted or contracts and supply relationships go south, or there's an issue with payments and stuff like that, you end up spending the time anyway, and you probably end up spending more time doing it. So that was definitely, one thing that popped up with them, as well as, really understanding spend visibility, visibility to data, understanding what you're spending where. As in most organizations, the idea of, maverick or rogue spend, or people going off and spending what they want when they want, is always a significant issue in small organizations as well as very, very large organizations. So if you've got an operation that's happening, where things are happening and outside of a kind of a central location, people are really doing what they need to do to keep the doors open, and are sometimes pushed back when you try to put them into a centralized kind of supplier process. But really it's that spend visibility that you probably have more than you think you have. Like I said, was the example that I was using as far as the tail spend, analysis. You probably have that data, and it's really not line item level. It's not, this person bought this at this day. If you can just even start at the top level and say, we spent X amount of money with this person, and X amount of money with this person, starting there really is the aha moment for a lot of people, where you're like, wow, I had no idea we spend money with this person, or we spend money with this company, or, how much do we spend? I thought I only spent 10 grand. We're spending 50 grand with these people. They should be doing a lot more. Just even starting from that, you don't need a full top down, program and data mining and everything to kind of go in and do this, year-long project to figure it out. You really can just kind of start with what you're doing today. You run something out of QuickBooks, run something out of whatever, AP system that you're using. Just take a look at the data and really look at it in a fresh way. Get a few people to look at it and identify some trends. And I think you can, you can go a long way to identifying some of those significant issues, or some of those problems that are probably causing you a lot more time and effort than you thought it would.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned, the resource, within the co-op, or even within just the member to, kind of understand some of this stuff, whether it's the legal knowledge or just the contract negotiation. We did a webinar earlier this year with Dorsey and Whitney. They're a law firm that specializes in cooperatives, and they talked about specifically Robinson Patman, really looking at fairness sort of across the board. And the question that I asked Michael Lindsay was the attorney that joined us, was, okay, so everybody's resource challenged. Who's the best person to actually handle this stuff on our staff? Is it somebody that has the financial background? Is it CEO? Is it, who is it, when you're resource challenged in your experience?
I think if you've got an organization with usually when you look at procurement organizations, they typically nest under the CFO, because typically that's who's handling the money. That's who's really focused on the cash flow. So I think if you've got someone either with in a finance role, or you have somebody that's a division, that's running a division, that's responsible for paying people, those are usually the people that have to, they've got a budget, they've got to make it work. They understand, where cash is going, how much cash you need today versus, how much are you committing when you sign some of these agreements. So
Sure.
from a procurement standpoint, if you don't have that kind of centralized procurement group, typically what I've seen is that responsibility falls under, someone that's responsible for not just buying for one group, like a head of IT or someone that's managing a warehouse or someone that's managing, different with a sole focus, because obviously their focus may not be the focus of another division of the company, another part of the company, but somebody that has that overall kind of overreaching responsibility, because they're going to see benefit across the whole organization, where if someone may say, oh well, I do it better for me and in this one spot. It's like,
Right.
oh, it's great, but we've got 50 locations, so it's good that it works out for you, but the other ones are suffering, so let's put something that works for everybody, and then that flows up into the overall finances of the organization.
Right. And you mentioned risk, and we talked about some of this, yesterday when you guys were in office. But the NDA portion of what you just mentioned, you talked just extensively about planning. You talked about working backwards. All those things, are really mitigating risk. And then, you get to this NDA spot where, you're starting to exchange information. In your opinion, you're working with these suppliers that, by your own admission in the presentation, are actively trying to slip things in there that are beneficial for them. So when is the right point to really go and take that NDA step? Because there has to be some level of trust already in your conversations to say, let's do this NDA, and have these conversations. You got to be able to have some type of relationship just to get there. Am I right, or is that not tracking?
Definitely. I think the second you start sharing anything proprietary, you should have something in place. You can have calls and talk to it. If you're looking at different suppliers and say, call their sales team and say, well, give me an overview of what you're trying to do. And they'll ask, hey, what are you trying to do? And, you say, well, we're looking at this. We might be looking at, this kind of system, or we're looking at this kind of product, but we're not, we're still in the planning phases for it, but we're just trying to find maybe some people to invite, as part of a sourcing activity, or, putting some bids out. But the second you start to release requirements, like we're looking to buy X, Y, Z, we're anything that's proprietary to that event, then I would have an NDA in place. So, if I'm going to send out a request for information or a request for proposal, the NDA, I get that signed before I release the document for them to bid against. So it's typical. Most people do it. Everybody does it from that standpoint. When you start to get into zones where you don't want, there could be some information that could get out that would be considered proprietary. I would want to have something in place, and that's really why I say the mutual non-disclosure agreement, because then it's like, hey, keep it simple and just say, okay, we're going to start talking here in real detail. Because there may be information they share with you that they don't want shared with your competitors. They may be giving you a deal that they're not going to give to them, or, maybe that they really want to get into your business and they're going to make some changes that they wouldn't make for an existing customer. So it keeps them protected too from you saying, hey, I know this, I play golf with this guy. Can you believe the deal that they're going to give us? It just creates a nice structure for everybody to share information and not have any worry that it's going to get out into the general market.
Sure. So I want to switch gears to the supplier card, the performance card that you mentioned. So it's a kind of a two-part question. Does the supplier, should they know that they're being scored? And then does Corcentric use this process when they, vet their folks in the indirect spend program?
Yes, very, very much so. So, so I'll answer both parts of your question here. So as far as what they're measuring, yes, definitely. So this is one of those things to either, when if you've got a program or a contract, put those we call them key performance indicators or the scorecard elements. Put them in the contract. If there's something you're going to be measuring them against, say, okay, I need to have this, from receipt of invoice, I need to be paid within 45 days. From receipt of order, you need to have it delivered based on, within 2 working days if it's this, or within 1 week if it's non-stocked. Those rules are usually the things that they're promising. Put them in the contract. Say you need to do this, and in some cases you can assign penalties based on the scorecard as well. So we've done that. You see that a lot in software, especially ones that are cloud-based, to where uptime, access to software is a performance indicator that you put in, and you say, I need 99.5% uptime, or else it's going to cause a penalty where you will return a certain performance, a certain amount of the invoice, because for that time that you were down, I couldn't use the system that I'm paying for. So it's all about communication. And if you set those rules and say, okay, here's what we're going to be measuring you against. If you the key ones you get in the contract. Other than that, put the scorecard together and share it with them. Well, we actually do at Corcentric in our supplier relationships. We actually do a 2-way scorecard. So we worked with our suppliers to create a mutual scorecard. So it's we've got a handful of things that we're measuring, whether it's sales, shipping costs. There's a whole lot of different little things. New customer acquisition, those sort of things that are in there. We have a red, yellow, green on both sides. So we actually send it to our suppliers. They fill it out against us, and then we fill it out for against their performance. And then we have a quarterly meeting where we bring it together and we put it up on this big screen and we go through it. And so here's what we think we're doing well. Here's what we need some more work. And that way you come out of it with tangible action items that that everyone can be marching to, that you can measure, and everyone knows where they stand. From that standpoint, and it takes the emotion out of it. Most of the time, it takes the emotion out, but it's really one of the things where you're on the same page, because you're partnering with the supplier to make sure that you're both successful. Because if you're not both successful, you're with the wrong supplier. So yeah, that's really definitely something we utilize quite a bit.
Cool, good. Well, I'm not seeing any questions come through. Any other ones? So I think we can say that this was a successful webinar. You clearly outlined everything, hopefully that people wanted to hear. So, for those on the line, again, thank you for joining us today. I want to thank Sean for all of his preparation and for, being an associate member of NCBA. We're certainly glad that they're part of the conversation. If anybody out there is looking for more information about purchasing co-ops, please feel free. You can contact me at B as in Brian, my last name Munson, MUNSON, at ncba.coop. And I would encourage everybody to subscribe to our Co-op Weekly e-newsletter for information on our upcoming Impact 2018 conference. That'll be the first week of October in 2018. And also just stay connected as we announce more activities that are, purchasing co-op related and ways to get engaged. So, Sean, unless you have anything, any closing words or anything, we're going to put a bow on this and send everybody on their way.
No, thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group. And like I said, if anybody has any questions or follow-up, that's my contact information, and please don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. I will talk to you soon. I'll give you a shout after this and we can catch up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.